Hey y'all, welcome back to the next episode of my story called Organized Chaos. Sorry for the, unpreparedness of the way I look today, but hey, it's a Sunday, so I'm being comfy. Y'all have to deal with it, okay? um, I just want to get started just where we left off so we can kind of minimize the amount of time each episode is to try and gain more viewers or the length of time each person is viewing the videos. Just because I'm noticing that on my YouTube videos and the analytics of everything. So, for those of you who have been watching, hopefully you know where we left off, but for those of you who haven't been like watching all the way through or know where we left off, we were basically talking about my childhood and things that I experienced up until like about middle school or like age 12, 13. And we got into some of my first relationships, and we were starting to talk about a very significant person in my life that definitely changed who I am today, and that was BJ. So I'm just gonna go right into it, and like I said, start where I left off. So, as far as me and BJ's relationship, you could definitely say it turned into like a love hate thing, and pretty fast at that, too. I didn't have much time to base things off of, though, considering I had only one serious relationship prior to him. And then just, how my parents are with one another. That's, the only basis I had on relationships, really. It got confusing for me because I was, raised a certain way and knew that men weren't supposed to talk to us a certain way or use physical force towards women. And I had never once seen my dad raise his hand to my mom. But I also think a lot of these conclusions are based upon the women sitting back and not saying a word in response or allowing things to happen a certain way. And I'm sorry, but I just wasn't that type to like sit back and just take it and watch someone walk all over me. If I knew you lied or were hiding something, then I was bringing it up. A lot of time, voices got raised, and then people's true colors start to show with their raised tempers. Names and words were used that I could have never imagined someone that loved me saying. It was complicated. We literally hated how much we loved each other. I truly believe this was a mutual thing, arguing over the phones constantly to the point that my dad literally went outside one time and unplugged the phone line from the outside of the house because I was on the phone with BJ arguing, and I used to go hide in my like walk-in closet in my bedroom. This is back with house phones, portable house phones. I would go in my walk-in closet and hide while we were on the phone arguing, and even in there I was so loud screaming and crying that people outside could hear me. And my dad used to like start unplugging the phone on me all the time when this would happen, and one time he literally unplugged it from the outside of the house. That's how loud I was. So that's pretty crazy. um Definitely happened more than once. Like I said, I would try to go to the furthest point away from everyone else hearing me, and like I said, going into my closet, but you could still hear me. And I guess a lot of it goes back to us each being very jealous and a bit obsessive, or in today's terms, codependent, with or over one another. We didn't help. What didn't help was that I was like still steady in high school while he really wasn't. He was supposed to be in like a reform school, like a high school for the bad kids because he got kicked out of our high school, um, which was like in a whole different school district. And then at one point, he even tried like the cyber schooling online, but I don't think none of it really worked out. With all that being said, we still had a similar group of friends. Though he was older with less authority in his life, he was able to go out way more than me. And then I'd have to hear about all these wild adventures he went on with different people or parties he was at, and the shit he was doing by people talking about it in school the next day. Not by him being honest with me. It was like the absolute worst having these snotty nosed bitches, sneering at me because they thought they knew something that I didn't. And, on many occasions they did. BJ lied to me a lot. And with the lies came a lot of unfaithfulness. He would just up and disappear for days at a time, sometimes more or less. This was all, of course, before cell phones were such a necessity as they are today. And all I had was his grandmother's house phone to call over and over, hoping that he'd be the one to answer finally. She was always just as clueless as I was. Our arguments in person. Sorry, I'm starting to talk really fast and then I mess up my words, so I apologize, but stick with me here. So our arguments in person started to turn into fights, and they became very heated and or more physical, more and more. There were times he threw a handful of change at me. He took my stack of collected letters and pictures of ours, um, and just completely ripped them in half, which I was livid about because I collected stuff like that. I've always been a scrapbooker and journaler and things like that, so that was so upsetting to me. He threw glass cups at my head that barely missed, hitting the wall behind me, right behind me where my hand is, the wall behind me. I mean, what do you expect me to do at this point? Of course, I would get angry right back. I can get quite the temper when provoked enough, and it takes a lot to get me to that point most of the time. So yeah, I started swinging back at him, never directly in the face, but usually at the back of his head or body shots. This was just always ended up resulting in him pushing or throwing me around pretty severely. One of the worst times I can account for is when he and a friend of his showed up where my girlfriend, who I'm gonna call BB, and if she's watching, she'll know who she is, and myself was hanging out at the time, which was all of our mutual friends. So it was a guy friend of ours, and me and her went over there to hang out with him and some other people, but he was also friends with mine and her boyfriend at the time too. But BJ and her boyfriend decided to barge in, flipping out because I was there for no other apparent reason. And that's when he grabbed me by the throat and started squeezing, and still until I started gasping for air. He said he'd stop hurting me if I took off the newer sneakers that I had on at the time, and gave them to him because he had just bought them for me a few weeks ago, and at the most wanted them back as some form of payback or punishment, as if the embarrassment of the intrusion into our friend's home and then the very public show of abuse among the extremely racy comments made during the length of time he was there wasn't enough. I did what he asked, of course, and gave him the shoes. I believe he left directly after that, but I'll have to say, out of the day's events thus far, the abuse didn't even bother me as much as the fact that I had two mutual male friends standing right there watching and listening to the whole thing, and not one tried to stop any of it. Um, to think I still continued to be friends with these people after that, too. The whole situation turned out even worse, though, because after getting back to my girlfriend's house, barefoot at that, I talked to BJ over the phone at some point and forgave him, of course, the naive little girl that I was. And I guess somewhere along the line, BB's mom had heard what happened and called my parents, and they were coming back from Baltimore, from staying the weekend at a family's house down there, and they were on their way back, and they showed up at her house to pick me up with the police, um, asking for a statement and the whereabouts of BJ, and I didn't want to get him into any trouble. So we go ahead home, and on the way home, the idiots are walking the streets even after we told them to stay inside. I had found a way to call him and let him know what was going on. because they were like right up the street at a friend's house from where I was at and where my parents were picking me up at. And we told them what was going on and to like not be out and about. And they still chose to be like, what happening to walk down the street as my parents finally got me in the car and started taking me home. And we happened to pass them on the way home. And, my mom swerved off the road like fast as hell, aiming to hit them both. Like, I've never seen her like that. Making me stay in the car. Both of my parents got out and went ape shit on the boys. I know they were in each other's faces. I can't really remember if my dad put his hands on either of the boys or not. Either way, we were made to break up and supposed to not have any communication or relationship. And all along, I'm crying my eyes out in the back seat of the car, going nuts over a boy who just tried choking the hell out of me. I mean, this was only one of the many times my folks tried to separate us, and it never seemed to stick. I was extremely adamant about wanting him in my life, and they caved every time. You have to trust me when I say there was just as many good moments, if not more, that I shared with Brian in our short 1 year, 5 day long relationship. Yeah, 5 days. 1 year, 5 day long relationship. And at that time, that was my longest relationship and would be for many years to come, as sad as that is. Um, sure, there were times we had or chose to break up throughout that period, but in the end, he was my longest relationship, like I said, up until my late adulthood, or more recently, actually, who I'm engaged to now. But on a more serious note, and I'm sorry, my little guy right here, Groucho, as you can see him, won't leave me alone because I chose to do this down in the living room today. Sorry. Um, November 5th, 2005 was when life as I knew it came to an abrupt and sudden screeching halt. Just 5 short days after we had celebrated our 1 year anniversary together in the best way we knew how back in that time, period, as kids. Our way was getting all decked out in our best attire and talking one of our families into chauffeuring us to the closest mall, which was at least 45 minutes away for us. So it was a whole thing when anyone went. And when we got to the mall, we would go out to eat and shop, usually for sneakers or fitted hats. And we would go to the movies. We would always get our pictures taken in those little photo booths in the middle of the mall, sitting in the middle of the walkways. That right there is one sure memory I have from our 1 year anniversary, is that picture from the mall, looking young and so happy. And I believe I still have that picture. But a few days later, it had been a normal Friday spent together at his house. His grandmother made an exceptional dinner that we all ate together. That was a thing, to sit at the table together, which my family didn't do, and still to this day, I remember everything we ate that night. And after finishing dinner, BJ and I retired back to his bedroom for some alone time together. We shared a magical moment of intertwined lovemaking. I can honestly say that I experienced my first feelings of actually lovemaking with him. And then we had a very sincere heart to heart conversation, which didn't happen all that often. To the point that I remember Brian getting choked up talking about his mother not being worried about him. As the evening dwindled quickly to an end, his gram had to take me home, which on the way I remember BJ laying his head in my lap after talking his very religious grandmother into turning a rap radio station on, and the both of us saying at the exact same time, a jinx moment, if you will, that we love this new Chris Brown song that sang through the car speakers. And we arrived at my house. BJ walked me inside. He came up to my bedroom to borrow a new burned copy of the Dipset CD that I had made. That was also a big fad back then, having the ability to burn already made albums or downloading illegal music and making mixed CDs. He also wanted to borrow this deer horn bowl. I don't know if a lot of you know about people making pot bowls out of deer horns, but they did, and I had found one, and he wanted it, so I gave it to him. Um, I also gave him this little throw pillow I had that I made in like call her whatever class it is in high school, but where you learn how to sew. I made this star throw pillow that had my name on it, and he wanted it to sleep with. And in exchange, I got a pair of his boxers to sleep in that night. It was like a thing back then to get stuff of your boyfriends to wear to bed or to sleep with that smelled like them, and I thought it was really cute that he wanted something of mine too to sleep with. Um, home ec's the class I'm talking about. God. Um, but so we did that and he left. He called me as soon as he got back home from dropping me off. We talked for a short, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and both agreed to going to bed because we had made plans for the next day to go see the new Saw movie in theaters. I must have fell asleep in my room with the TV on because I awoke out of a dead sleep at a little past midnight to the static black and white screen, and for some odd reason, I had the urge to call BJ. Now, just so we're all clear, when BJ goes to bed, he'd always keep this cordless phone with him in his room, so if people called, it wouldn't wake up his grandma Shirley. When I called that night and Shirley picked up, I quickly disconnected or hung up on her and thought to myself that this was a bit strange. He said he was going to bed. I tried to push the obvious to the back of my mind and went back to bed. The next morning, I can remember every last little detail down to the T. I awoke at a little past 9 a.m. and ran immediately to the phone to call BJ about our plans for that afternoon. Giddy with excitement and proudly wearing his borrowed forest green plaid boxers. Before I was able to reach for the phone, my mother had stopped me and asked me for me to follow her and my father upstairs to the bedroom to talk. I said, "Oh boy, here we go," I thought. I racked my brain to come up with any reasons at all why they might be upset with me or something they found out about BJ and me, but I was at a loss. It had happened on numerous occasions before where they'd make us break up or ground me from using the phone or so on. They already knew everything at this point, and BJ and I have been abiding by their rules basically. When we arrived upstairs in their bedroom, I do believe my older sister emerged in the tiny confines of my parents' domain. Needless to say, it was strange to me that they were standing around waiting to talk at such an early hour in such a personal room. They never bring us upstairs to talk. My parents have personal convos in here, and then all of us girls take turns taking mom upstairs to have private conversation. But that's about it. If my parents wanted to bitch at us about something, they'd do it anywhere in front of just about anybody. So the next words that come out of my mother's mouth will forever be burned into my brain and an etching on my heart. She says, "Hannah, we're about to tell you something that's going to break your little heart." Once again, I'm dumbfounded as to what this is about and ready to jump to my defense at any given moment. Never in all my life did I expect or prepare for this heart wrenching truth. My family then goes on to tell me that Brian was killed earlier that morning in a single automobile collision. What? Like, what? Um, I didn't fully understand. How do you grasp a concept of losing your world so unexpectedly? What was said and the events that happened next are all boggled and a bit fuzzy in my memory. Sorry, guys. So, all I ask is that you all please bear with me as I try to explain the best I can. I proceeded to ask questions like how could he be dead when he was home all night? Then I realized when I awoke in the middle of the night and tried to call him, he didn't answer. Shit, he went out even after promising me he would stay home all night. I was then told that he was riding around with so and so person who called him in the middle of the night and talked him into coming out for a few hours because he had taken his dad's work truck. I believe Shirley, BJ's grandma, had left between 4 to 6 a.m. for work and ran into a holdup and either found out there or once back home found out what happened. She directly called our house, and surprisingly, my older sister was awake already and got the news. I recall asking where the friend was, and I then found out that he was in the hospital and survived but badly beat up. Again, I couldn't fathom this and immediately shot over to my room to put jeans on and said, "No, take me over there to his house." I think I truly believed everybody had to be mistaken. If his friend was in the hospital alive, then BJ had to be too. Now, I guess Shirley had told the family it occurred, the collision, within a short distance of their home, but my mom at the time didn't know exactly where or how truly close it happened. So once my mother and I were finally on our way, we were stopped just a half to a quarter mile short of their driveway, made to pull off on the side of the road and park because the road was closed off with a whole scene on display. To continue on to BJ's house, we were made to walk the rest of the way, which meant walking past the entire event, as if replaying it from start to finish. They had went off the opposite side of the road, taking out a telephone pole, along with two huge separate pine or maple trees. After all of that, the truck rolled over completely several times before landing on its side several hundred feet away from the initial impact. There were tree branches, truck pieces, and debris scattered everywhere, including BJ's winter coat laying covered in a mixture of oil and blood that was later given to me. Once we passed the truck, I witnessed the most horrifying picture one can imagine. On the blacktop road was lined in white chalk was where Brian's body had been splayed out after being ejected from the windshield. Now you can imagine any possible doubt I had before this point about BJ being dead up until this point were completely taken from me. I nearly fainted, and my mother had to hold me up the rest of the way to their house. She kept apologizing and said she was unaware we'd come across the scene at all. Maybe to some people this may not seem like much of a big deal, but living where I did, it wasn't a common sight to see any bodies chalked out besides on television. Still to this day, it's the only one I've yet to witness and hope I ever have to. Um, and at that, I'm gonna take a break. Gets me a little emotional every time, even though it's been years. There's a little bit more to his part of my story, but I'm gonna stop there. So I told you it gets a little intense and pretty detailed. I still ended up going a little bit longer than what I wanted to, but it's kind of hard to stop in the middle of something like that. So I hope you all take this to heart, and see that there really is a lot to share from my story. There's a lot to be said. And this is just the beginning. I was 13 when this happened. So there's a whole lot of years left after this of just trauma after trauma, or situations that I put myself in and mistakes that I made that led up to, what ultimately was my demise, but also made me who I am today. And I'm thankful to be here today. But I still struggle every day with everything that I've went through. And I just really hope that people can support me through this journey and understand that this is real. I'm telling you the truth, to the best of my ability, and I just want to share it with everybody because I hope it will help others get through similar things that I've went through. So again, thank you all for your support, and please like and subscribe or leave comments below on my YouTube channel specifically, and please watch for my next episode of my story called Organized Chaos by Hannah Dreadful. Thanks, everybody.